There are books that entertain you, books that teach you something, books that comfort you. And then, every once in a while, there's a book that rearranges you. When Breath Becomes Air is one of those books. It's not just a memoir. It's a confrontation. A meditation. A love letter. A last breath turned into language. The man who wrote it, Dr. Paul Kalanithi, lived only 37 years. But in that time, he wore many skins: son, reader, writer, philosopher, surgeon, husband, father, patient, and finally, storyteller. And this book is his story. Paul wasn't just brilliant, he was curious, the kind of person who asked the big questions not for the sake of sounding smart, but because he truly wanted to understand what makes a life meaningful. What's the line between the body and the soul? And what do we do when that line starts to blur, when breath begins to turn into air? This book was published in 2016, less than a year after Paul passed away from stage 4 lung cancer. He wrote much of it while his body was deteriorating, between treatments, in hospital beds, at moments when even lifting a spoon took effort. But the writing doesn't feel rushed or chaotic. It feels measured, clear, poetic. It's as if he were distilling a lifetime of thought into its most essential parts. The title itself, When Breath Becomes Air, tells you everything and nothing. It comes from a line in a 17th century poem, but it's more than poetry. It's about that moment we all try not to think about, the instant when the breath that once filled a life disappears. And what's left is something we can't quite explain. That transition. That stillness. That's the space this book explores. Paul grew up in the Arizona desert, surrounded by quiet landscapes and shelves filled with books. His mother, relentless in her pursuit of a better life for her sons, introduced Paul to literature early on. And it stuck. He didn't just read, he consumed ideas. He was that rare kind of thinker who felt equally at home reading T.S. Eliot and studying brain scans. And that dual love, for science and for meaning, is what led him to medicine. He wasn't just fascinated by the brain as an organ, he was obsessed with what it held: identity, memory, joy, personality, consciousness. So he became a neurosurgeon, not just to heal people, but to understand them. To stand at the boundary of life and death, and learn something real. For a while, Paul lived life at full speed. Long hospital shifts, back-to-back surgeries, life-or-death decisions made under pressure, and all the while, his mind was still churning with questions. He was a man driven not by ego, but by purpose. By the weight of responsibility. He knew that every patient he touched might never be the same again. He didn't take that lightly. And then, everything changed. Paul was 36. In peak physical health. On the brink of completing one of the most demanding training paths in medicine. And he was about to be offered the job of his dreams. But then came the back pain. The weight loss. The fatigue. The symptoms he'd brushed off became harder to ignore. He ordered his own scans. Read them before anyone else. And in a surreal twist of fate, the man who had diagnosed others for years now found himself on the screen. A spine lit up with cancer. Stage 4. The rest of the book is Paul's journey from that moment forward. The emotional shift from doctor to patient. The reckoning with time. The questions about what it means to be useful, to be present, when the future you planned has been erased. But even in that darkness, there is light. Paul doesn't sink into self-pity. He writes. He reflects. He even chooses to become a father. He decides to leave behind more than just a memory. He leaves behind a daughter, and this book, and a roadmap for what it means to live well while dying. When Breath Becomes Air is especially powerful in today's world, where we're constantly told to chase more time, more productivity, more success. But Paul reminds us that life isn't just about the length of our days, it's about the depth of them. The choices we make, the people we love, the conversations we have, the stillness we allow ourselves. And what truly makes this book sing is that Paul doesn't write to inspire you. He writes to be honest. He shows you his fear, his hope, his doubts, his faith, his grief. his joy. It's not polished, it's human. And that's what makes it unforgettable. The final pages of the book were written by Paul's wife, Lucy, after his passing. She steps in not just as a grieving widow, but as a fellow physician, and more importantly, as the person who knew Paul most intimately. Her words are a quiet echo of his, filled with grace, gratitude, and deep respect. When you finish this book, you don't just feel like you've read someone's story. You feel like you've met them. And through them you see your own life. Sharper, richer, and more sacred than before. So wherever you are, however you're listening or reading, pause. Take a breath. And step into this story, not with fear, but with openness. Because when breathe becomes air is not just about dying. It's about what it means to live, even when time is short. Especially when time is short. Let's start with part 1. In perfect health I begin. The story begins quietly. No dramatic hospital scenes, no flashing images of illness. Instead, it starts with a memory. A man in his mid-30s, Paul Kalanithi, is standing at a mirror, examining his own spine. He's lost weight. His back hurts. His nights are restless. But more than that, he knows. There's a shift inside him. A sense. A flicker of fear that won't go away. He doesn't panic. He doesn't call his doctor. He orders his own scans. Because Paul is not just any man. He's a neurosurgeon at Stanford, one of the best in his class, nearing the end of 10 brutal years of medical training. He can read his own CT scan like someone else might read the weather report. And what he sees hits harder than anything he ever read in school. Stage 4 lung cancer. Just like that, the story rewinds. And we're taken back to the desert. Paul grew up in Kingman, Arizona, a town that sat on the edge of nowhere, quiet, dry, isolated. A place where the landscape could feel both endless and stifling. His father was a doctor, but it was his mother who shaped his mind. Determined not to let her sons be limited by the school system, she fed them literature like oxygen. She crafted a curriculum that would rival any Ivy League prep school. Books weren't just encouraged, they were survival. Paul devoured stories. Poetry, philosophy, classic novels, they weren't just words to him. They were blueprints to the human soul. He wanted to understand people, not just their behaviors, but their being. Their why. He didn't dream of medicine back then. His plan was to become a writer. A literary scholar. Someone who could hold the world in a sentence. But then something shifted. At Stanford, Paul double majored in English literature and biology. 2 worlds, 1 brain. In labs, he studied cells. In lecture halls, he studied consciousness. And at the intersections between the two, something began to stir. Could biology explain identity? Could the physical brain give rise to the intangible soul? That question haunted him. He studied philosophy. He read minds, metaphorically at first, then literally. He began to realize, if he really wanted to understand life and death, he had to get closer. Closer than books would ever allow. So he pivoted. He chose medicine. Not for prestige, not for power, but to stand at the border between life and what comes after. He wasn't trading in his literary soul, he was trying to make it real. And so, Paul entered Yale Medical School. There, he met Lucy, a fellow med student, and eventually, the love of his life. They were kindred spirits. Sharp, curious, compassionate. They challenged each other. Pushed each other. Built something unspoken. Quietly, they fell in love, not in dramatic scenes, but in the intimacy of late-night study sessions and long shifts in the ER. The grind of medical school gave way to the gauntlet of neurosurgical residency at Stanford, arguably one of the most demanding fields in all of medicine. The hours were insane. 90-hour weeks. Sleepless nights. Life and death calls. Paul wasn't just learning how to operate, he was learning how to live with the weight of being the last person someone saw before they slept under the knife, the first person they might see when they woke up, if they woke up at all. And this was where Paul began to confront the reality that medicine is more than science, it's storytelling. Each patient was a narrative interrupted. A life paused. A plot twisted. He tells us about patients with brain tumors the size of fists, young people with spinal injuries who would never walk again, elderly women who came in laughing and left speechless after a stroke. And he had to be the one to tell them, to guide them, to operate on the place where their personality lived. It was sacred. It was terrifying. Paul saw firsthand how easy it was to become numb, to treat a diagnosis, not a person. He fought hard against that. He tells us about a mentor who reminded him, "It's not about avoiding death. It's about understanding what life is worth living for." That stuck with him. But somewhere in all the devotion, cracks began to show. His relationship with Lucy began to suffer. There were nights of silence. Conversations that never happened. She was there, but distant. He was there, but buried under stress and fatigue. Their love wasn't gone, but it was strained. Paul couldn't find the words to explain how medicine was draining him. Lucy couldn't reach the version of Paul she used to know. They were side by side, yet worlds apart. Still, Paul pushed on. He was nearly done with his training. Just 1 year left. He was almost there. His dream job was waiting. His future, everything he had worked for, was finally in reach. And then came the symptoms. The back pain that wouldn't go away. The weight loss that was too fast to ignore. The fatigue that wasn't normal. Lucy urged him to see a doctor. He resisted at first. But deep down, he knew. He didn't need a second opinion. He needed a scan. So he took control. He arranged the test. He looked at the results. And there it was. Cancer. Everywhere. Not localized. Not treatable in the long term. Not something he could fight and walk away from. Stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that rearranges your reality in a single breath. And just like that, the chapter ends. The doctor becomes the patient. The storyteller faces his final story. And as the title of this part reminds us, in perfect health I begin. It's painfully ironic. Because by the time we understand how deeply Paul lived, how hard he fought to find meaning in medicine, he's already losing the very body that carried him there. Part 1 is a journey into ambition, love, meaning, and becoming. It's the before that makes the after all the more heartbreaking. Now, Part 2. Cease not till death. The story doesn't pick up where it left off. It drops you in a different world. Paul is no longer standing in the operating room. No more scalpel in hand, no more surgical mask, no more pager buzzing in his pocket. Now, he's wearing a paper gown. He's lying on a hospital bed. He's watching the fluorescent lights pass overhead as nurses push him through hallways he used to walk with authority. He is now the patient. The transformation is sudden, but not just physical. It's existential. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you planned for, everything you built your identity around, has been stripped away in a single diagnosis. Paul isn't wondering if he will die. He knows he will. What he doesn't know is when, or how, or what to do with the time in between. At first, it's chaos. Appointments, scans, biopsies, chemotherapy. His hair falls out. His muscles shrink. His skin pales. He goes from being the strong, focused neurosurgeon to a fragile man whose body has turned against him. But here's the thing, Paul doesn't fall apart. He starts asking questions. Just like he always has. What does it mean to live when the future has been erased? What does purpose look like when you might not be here in a year? And what does it mean to be a doctor when you're now the patient? That duality becomes central to part 2. Because Paul never fully leaves his role as a physician. He starts to see the medical world from both sides. He notices how doctors speak to him, some with awkward pity, others with cold detachment. He watches how they fumble with words, how they avoid the word death, how they default to statistics instead of connection. He realizes how ill-equipped medicine can be for conversations about dying. And that bothers him. Because he remembers being that doctor too, one who focused on treatments, not truths. One who thought he was being kind by offering options, when what patients really needed was honesty. Paul doesn't want euphemisms. He wants clarity. He wants his doctors to talk to him like a man, not a chart. And in the middle of all this, comes a choice. Does he go back to work? It seems insane at first. His body is weak. His energy comes in short bursts. But his spirit? It's restless. Paul doesn't want to wait around to die. He wants to keep being himself. And for Paul, that means surgery. That means patience. That means scrubbing in and standing at the operating table, even if only for a few hours at a time. And he does it. He goes back to work. He puts the gown back on. Not the hospital gown, but the surgical one. He walks back into the OR, trembling but steady, and for those moments, he feels alive again. Not because the cancer is gone, it's still there, but because he's doing what he was born to do. But that return to work is also a form of negotiation with time. Paul starts to realize, he may not have years. He may only have months. And if that's the case, what then? What do you choose when you know the end is close? For Paul and Lucy, the answer is love, reconnection, stillness, and one day, a conversation that changes everything. Do you think we should have a child? It's not romanticized. It's not a Hallmark moment. It's heavy, delicate, real. Lucy asks, "Wouldn't that be sad, to leave a child without a father?" Paul responds, "Wouldn't it be great if it did happen?" That decision, to bring life into the world even as his own is fading, becomes one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking moments in the book. It's Paul's final act of defiance against time. His way of saying, "I may not be here long, but I will leave love behind." So they try. And they succeed. Lucy gets pregnant. And now, time has a new shape. Paul writes like a man on fire. He's trying to get it all down, to capture the thoughts that have been brewing inside him for years. His body may be giving up, but his mind is sharper than ever. Every sentence is carved from pain and clarity. This book is not a goodbye letter, it's a legacy. A testimony to living. But cancer, relentless as ever, doesn't pause for purpose. Eventually, the treatments stop working. Paul loses more weight. He's hospitalized. Breathing becomes harder. Simple things, eating, standing, walking, feel like monumental tasks. Still, he writes. And then, the baby comes. Katie. His daughter. In the final days of his life, Paul holds her. He whispers to her. He doesn't cry, not in front of her. He tells her, "When you come to one of the many moments in life where you must give an account of yourself, do not, I pray, discount that you filled the dying man's days with a joy unknown to me in all my prior years." And that line stays with you. Because in the end, when breath becomes air isn't just about death. It's about how even the shortest lives can be filled with purpose, love, meaning, and beauty. The book ends not with Paul's words, but with Lucy's. She steps in after his passing and tells us what those final hours were like. Her voice is soft, strong, and full of grace. She holds Paul's story with reverence, not sorrow. And in doing so, she allows us to say goodbye, not just to a writer or a surgeon, but to a soul we've come to know. Now, epilogue, told by Lucy Kalanithi. Paul is gone. And now it's Lucy who speaks. Not just as his wife, but as a doctor, a mother, and a witness to the final days of a man who lived more fully in his dying than most of us do in our living. Her voice is calm, not broken, not overly poetic, just honest. She tells us about Paul's final moments with stunning clarity. How he stayed Paul to the very end, thoughtful, loving, focused. How he tried to make decisions about his care with the same calm he brought to the operating room. No panic. No dramatics. Just truth. When the cancer worsened, Paul's breathing got worse. His oxygen levels dropped. The writing slowed. His sentences became shorter. Eventually, he was admitted to the hospital, this time, not as a doctor trying to return to surgery, but as a man nearing the end. Lucy paints the scene of his last night. She stood by his side, watching his chest rise and fall. She knew what was coming. She had seen it before in patients. But this time, it was different. This was her partner. Her best friend. The father of her newborn daughter. The man who held her hand through his own decline. Paul had always said he didn't want aggressive, life-prolonging treatment if the time came. He wanted to meet his death with eyes wide open. To face it not as a failure, but as part of the human story. Lucy honored that. When it was time, she made the call. She told the doctors to stop the machines. To let him go in peace. He died in her arms. No dramatic music. No grand final words. Just a quiet passing, dignified, full of grace. But Lucy doesn't end it there. She talks about what came after. About grieving. About raising their daughter, Katie, who will only ever know her father through the pages of this book. About how Paul's death wasn't the end of his story. It was the start of his legacy. Lucy writes that Paul's clarity at the end, the way he accepted death, the way he embraced life even in its final moments, has stayed with her. And it changes her. It changes how she sees her patients. How she sees her own life. How she chooses to keep going. Paul died while writing this book, but the words he left behind, his questions, his courage, his refusal to turn away, are still here. Still alive. Lucy gives us the final gift of the book, the reminder that Paul's voice didn't vanish with his breath. It's right here in your hands. In your mind. In your heart. Finally, takeaways of this book. When you turn the final page of When Breathe Becomes Air, something shifts. You feel it, not just in your thoughts, but in your bones. It's not a loud realization, not a dramatic ending. It's quiet. A soft hum under your skin. Because this isn't just a book about dying, it's about what it means to be fully, painfully, beautifully alive. Paul Kalanithi was a neurosurgeon. A scientist. A scholar of literature. A husband. A father. And in his final chapter of life, a writer who chose to share the raw truth of what it means to lose everything you thought you were, and still, reach for meaning. He had trained his whole life to save others, to make sense of the brain, to hold life and death in his own two hands. But when cancer found him at 36, he was forced to switch roles, from doctor to patient. From the one with the answers, to the one full of questions. And that shift? That moment when his identity began to fall away? That's where the story really begins to breathe. This book doesn't teach you how to avoid pain. It doesn't wrap things up in a bow. It just tells the truth. That sometimes, your dreams dissolve right when you've almost reached them. That even when your body is breaking down, your spirit can still expand. That love doesn't disappear in the face of death, it deepens. It becomes the anchor. And what's most remarkable? Paul didn't wait for life to be perfect before he decided to live it. He lived while he was dying. He wrote while he was weak. He became a father knowing he might not stay long. He chose presence over protection. Meaning over comfort. He looked death in the eye, not with bitterness, but with wonder. With courage. With a kind of grace that you don't see very often. Reading this book, you're reminded that we spend so much time planning, chasing, achieving, but often forget to be here. To sit in the sunlight. To look into someone's eyes. To speak honestly. To forgive quickly. To choose joy not someday, but now. Paul shows us that death isn't the enemy. The real tragedy is living without meaning. Drifting through days, numb to the beauty that still exists even in the hardest moments. He challenges us to ask, if you knew your time was limited, really knew it, what would you stop postponing? What would you hold closer? What would you finally say? In his final months, Paul could have turned inward. He could have stayed quiet. But instead, he gave us his voice. He gave us his fear, his hope, his questions, and he trusted that maybe, through those things, he could still heal people. Not through surgery anymore, but through story. That's what this book is. A gift. A guide. A mirror. Not one that tells you what to do, but one that invites you to look at your own life, and to live it with more honesty, more presence, more love. And now, even though Paul's breath has become air, his words still live. They speak. They remind. They comfort. They whisper gently, "You are still here." So live like it. If you found this summary insightful and valuable, don't forget to show your support by subscribing to the Mindful Brief on YouTube. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this audiobook summary, share it with your peers, friends, or family who might benefit from it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more in-depth and valuable content for you. Stay tuned for more summaries, insights, and strategies to elevate your knowledge and career. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.